Even though Avengers Endgame brought us closer to 11 years of cinematic storytelling, it raised a few questions of its own. So today we are going to answer one of those puzzling problems that almost seems like a plot hole. And yes, it has all to do with the snap. How was Tony Stark able to snap so easily at the end of the movie, whereas Professor Hulk struggled quite a lot with the Gauntlet? Just putting on the Gauntlet was almost unbearable for the Hulk, and he barely managed to snap his fingers to bring back all those lost in the decimation before he fell back on the ground unconscious. And let me remind you, this is the Hulk that we are talking about, the guy with the best healing ability and probably the toughest guy that there is. And then there is the fact that the radiation from the Gauntlet was mainly gamma, which should have further made things easy for the Hulk. But as we see in that sequence, Hulk almost looks helpless. Whereas when Tony snapped, he was totally in control. It just took him a few seconds to regain his composure, and before he snapped his fingers, he even managed to diss Thanos with his legendary line, "I am Iron Man." So what exactly is going on here? Did Marvel really mess things up and created an unexplainable plot hole? Or is this something that they had to do to give a fitting farewell to the guy who had started it all? That said, on a closer inspection, it will be evident that this is not a plot hole at all. Rather, it has a very simple and spot-on answer, so let's get into it.
We're the Avengers. We can bust arms dealers all the livelong day, but that up there, that's the endgame.
The first Gauntlet that we see in Avengers Infinity War was made by the legendary weapon maker Eitri the Dwarf. But even that Gauntlet got almost fried when Thanos used it to wipe half of the living creatures in the universe. Perhaps Eitri had never imagined that Gauntlet would be used on such a scale. But since Tony knew what exactly was making the Gauntlet for, it seems reasonable to assume that the guy who had invented time travel would have managed to create the Gauntlet that is more durable and is capable of handling multiple snaps. And the fact that he wasn't the only genius in the room makes things even easier. He was accompanied by Professor Hulk, who is the go-to expert in handling gamma radiations, and Rocket Raccoon, who is one of the most dangerous weapons expert in the galaxy. And Rocket along with Thor had made Eitri the original maker of the Gauntlet. So maybe they had learned a thing or two about making the Gauntlet, which they would have eventually shared with Tony. So all this explains without doubt how Tony's Gauntlet was in one piece and looked just fine after Hulk used it to bring half of the universe creatures who were lost to Thanos' snap 5 years ago. So now let's move on to the question, why was the snap so difficult for the Hulk? Well, other than the fact that wielding all the 6 Infinity Stones takes a toll, we have to consider what was Hulk exactly trying to do with all these stones. Other than just bringing half of the universe, Hulk had to make sure that they appeared in a safe environment. That is, the person who was flying a helicopter doesn't just appear mid-air, or a person who dusted while driving doesn't just appear out of nowhere on a busy highway just to be run over by another passing vehicle. And the example just goes on. What about people who disappeared from construction sites? They had to be brought back such that they weren't fused with the walls of some multi-story buildings. And the people who were on a deep sea voyage had to be brought back on some piece of land. So I guess by now you get the point. If Thanos' snap took X toll, where everybody just disappeared irrespective of where they were and what they were doing, then what Hulk did must have taken 2x toll. I'm not going to go into the math of that, but considering the effort that it took, it should be no brainer that what Hulk did must have taken more effort than that of Thanos. And that wasn't all that Professor Hulk was trying to do. On top of bringing back all the people back safely, he was even trying to bring back Black Widow. And even though she was just one person, it must have costed him a bit too much, as the sacrifice for the Solar Stone is irreversible, and not even the complete Infinity Gauntlet is all that powerful to bring her back from the dead. So Hulk trying his best and putting all his effort to bring her back must have pushed the Gauntlet to its limits. And it is because of these 3 reasons that the snap proved to be too taxing for Professor Hulk. So considering that, let's move on to Iron Man's snap. The first thing that should be evident about Tony's snap is the magnitude of its effect. Tony only aimed to erase all of Thanos' army, which is almost insignificant compared to what Thanos and Hulk did with their snaps. But even that came at a cost. Tony had to trade off his life to save the universe. Other than the fact that Tony wasn't using the stones to cause a universe-level effect, his nanotech armor also helped him by absorbing the damage. How did his new Iron Man armor allow him to perform the snap instead of being toasted straight away? We know that the materials of Tony's Gauntlet was nanites, which was the same as that of his suit, and the nanites proved to be more than capable of handling all the 6 Infinity Stones. So when Tony takes the stones from Thanos, and when they get embedded in Tony's armor, we see a streak of energy running up along his armor. And since the armor was designed from the same material as the Gauntlet, it helped Tony by absorbing the extra radiation, because of which only after a split second, Tony regains the control and delivers that iconic line as he snaps away his biggest enemy. Hulk didn't have the advantage of nanotech suit, and that's another reason that contributed to his struggle. Another major factor in using the stones is the state of mind and willpower. There has to be a human will for these stones to act, which answers the question why Tony didn't step out of his armor and let the empty armor perform the snap, as we have seen Tony do things like that in Spider-Man Homecoming and Iron Man 3. Talking about the state of mind, if you know Hulk, then you know how fragile his inner mind is. If not, I've done a whole video on that. The link will be in the upper right corner. Now since Hulk's mind is as chaotic as one can be, he had to go an extra mile in order to ensure that it is his will that the stones follow and the output is not affected by his deep inner conflict, as his various personalities are always trying to gain control of his body. Now compare that to Tony, who wanted the world to be a safer place for his daughter and Peter more than anything, and his failure to stop Thanos was always something that he had struggled with for the last 5 years. So he had no doubts what he wanted to do. His resolve was unflinching, which can be clearly seen on his face as he utters the last few words of his life. So I guess these 3 reasons paint a clearer picture and a better understanding of how the snap works in the MCU. But there's always the question, did Tony really have to die? Couldn't someone else do the snap? After all, there were beings like Captain Marvel and Thor, and there was always the possibility that Doctor Strange could have used the Time Stone to fix things up. Before you say that none of those would have worked because of Doctor Strange's 14 million possibilities, well, then as I have said before, there are bound to be more than 14 million possibilities. And Doctor Strange couldn't have possibly seen all of those, as he was interrupted by Tony midway while he was looking for a way to stop Thanos in Avengers Infinity War. So maybe, if Tony had allowed Strange to continue for a few more minutes, Strange would have seen another way. So in some poetic sense, Tony unknowingly sealed his fate when he interrupted Strange. Now that's some clever writing, and it is at moments like this that you really begin to appreciate the layered writing in Marvel's cinematic universe, where everything holds some meaning and every tiny action has unforeseen consequences that are beautifully paid off at a later moment. And one another such moment was when the team tried to get the Gauntlet off of Thanos in Avengers Infinity War. We know that both Iron Man and Spider-Man struggled quite a bit to get that Gauntlet off of Thanos, and while one Peter managed to almost get it out, another Peter made sure that Thanos regains control and wipes off half of the universe, an act undoing which will cost Black Widow and Tony their lives. And the same moment repeats itself in Avengers Endgame when Tony tries to get the Gauntlet of Thanos, and this time Tony didn't have the help of other heroes. This must have been a deja vu moment for our hero, but over the years, one thing that we have come to learn about Tony is that he learns from the past, and especially his past mistakes. So this time around he doesn't bother with the Gauntlet, he just removes the stones, which begs the question, why didn't the Avengers and the Guardians try the same thing in Infinity War? Tony had the nanotech armor, couldn't he have just removed the stones from the Gauntlet? Well, to answer that, in Infinity War Tony never had the chance to study the stones. He didn't know how to handle those, and since the Power Stone can destroy a mortal being by just coming into contact, something that Guardians knew better than anyone, so maybe they had warned Tony against going for any such fancy ideas. And since Tony had a limited knowledge about these stones, he had no other option but to trust these space morons. But what about Doctor Strange? He must have learnt a lot about these stones after he saw Thanos using them in his 14 million victories. Now that is another grey area, but maybe Doctor Strange saw in one of his visions that telling Tony about these stones would lead to undesirable outcome, as Tony would die trying to remove the Power Stone, thus leading to Thanos' victory. So to conclude things, the snap will always be remembered as one of the most iconic moments in cinematic storytelling. Out of hundreds of MCU characters, only 3 have executed the snap. While Thanos snapped to fulfill his life's destiny, Hulk snapped to restore the lost life, and Tony snapped to avenge the fallen. But using the Infinity Stones comes at a price. As Baron Mordo tells us in Doctor Strange movie, that meddling with the laws of universe accumulates debt, which one day gets too big to be repaid. Tony paid that debt with his life, while a being like Hulk, who has one of the best healing factors, now has a permanently damaged right hand. But that said, the snap was probably the best way to say farewell to the character who has always risked it all for the greater good. From the first Iron Man movie to the Avengers Endgame, Tony almost died in each of those movies. Even though he is a billionaire with a genius mind, he has often found himself helpless and at the verge of death. But when the death finally came for Tony, it transcended him from a hero to a legend. Both MCU and us fans will continue to look back at this snap and how it changed things forever. We'll not see another snap in the MCU for quite a long time, as the Infinity Stones were reduced to mere atoms by Thanos. But the essence of these stones still live on in the universe, and maybe one day they will make their appearance in some form or the other. And with that, we'll bring this video to an end. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Marvel content.